Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us. Today is Tuesday, December 19th, 2023, and this is the special governing board meeting and study session for the Litchfield Elementary School District Governing Board. I hereby call this meeting to order. We are going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. If you could please stand and join us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next, we are going to take a moment of silent reflection. Okay, we are going to move on to the consent agenda. So I will see if anybody wants to take anything off of the consent agenda tonight. Ms. Clymer?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Ms. Moran?
No, thank you.
Mr. Owens?
No, thank you.
I don't either.
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented. I will second.
Having a first and a second, I'll call for the vote. Ms. Clymer?
Yay.
Ms. Moran?
Yay.
Mr. Owens?
Yay.
I'm also a yay. Motion passes. Next, we are going to move on to our reason we're all here tonight to discuss the boundary options. I'm going to have us start with Dr. Davidson, and then the presentation will be by Executive Director Stone and Executive Director Benjamin.
Thank you, President Zeidema, members of the board, cabinet members and guests. We're excited tonight to present to the governing board some key findings, top happenings as it relates to the work of the boundary committee and the team members that gave a lot of time and effort to putting this presentation together. I publicly wanted to thank the team that's not here, but also our two presenters, Mr. Stone and Ms. Benjamin, have been working many hours along with some of you in the crowd on putting together a presentation that hopefully will make sense tonight. You will hear outcomes and you will hear desires from our team about how we would like to see this go in the future. But I wanted you to know that that doesn't mean that tonight we aren't gathering your feedback and gathering the information that you've probably put together based on your time and effort as well. We just wanted you to know where we're coming from, but we recognize there is no vote tonight, and certainly we'll capture that information and bring it back sometime in January. So thank you again for letting us be here, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Stone and Ms. Benjamin.
Thank you, Dr. Davidson. Governing board members, thanks for being here tonight, and those who have chosen to join us or were told to join us. A lot of really great work that has come to fruition over the last 4 months. And personally to me, it's really helped me dig into Litchfield and who we are as individual schools. And so, of course, we want to continue to align with our strategic plan, and we know that creating boundary changes does so in all 4 categories. Focus on student success, people, service, and then, of course, finances and resources, which could be the biggest one overall. But we've not weighted them because there's very interesting ways in how they all weigh in on this. The outcomes that we're looking for today, right, is to provide clarity and understanding of the committee work, provide grid codes and updated maps of the recommendations for boundary changes, and then discuss the possibility of a phased approach based on minimal disruption for students. At the end of the day, that's kind of where we kept coming back to of how can we be impactful but not disruptive. And so that's really the final few hours and weeks from our committee, and then our work on what we focus on is minimizing that disruption, but knowing we still have to be impactful. And so we have lots of information here to discuss and go through to really dig deep, allowing us to get to a place to go, hey, what's really best for Litchfield? So
on the screen right now is the school projections. This has been the information that's been available to you since last April from our demographer. And it just shows the reality of what could come if we don't make any adjustments or changes. Current reality and big picture, we've presented this already, but we felt it was just important to have in here. We won't spend too much time on it, but really the issue was the focus on the west side of the district where we are overcrowded and the east side where there is some availability and room. And how do we support all of our students and all of our campuses to meet the needs of doing what's best for all students? Here are the current boundaries in front of you, and this is exactly what we have right now today. If you are a student in one of these grid codes, this is the campus that you will be going to. We wanted to just make sure that this was provided in case there were questions about where students are currently attending. All right, and here we're going to start to get into the nitty-gritty. This is the current enrollment and capacity numbers at each of our schools. So these enrollment numbers would have been from about 2 weeks ago. This is exactly where we are. So you can see the school abbreviation, the current enrollment, the capacity is 90 to 100%. We do that. This is based on Mr. Vaughn's work of what is available in a school if we also continue to include special areas, our specialized programs. So taking those out, how many classrooms are available in a school. So that is how the 90% comes, 90 to 100%. And then we have the actual capacity number. So you can see very clearly, we have some schools that are well over capacity, and we have some schools that are well under capacity, which is exactly why we are here looking at this boundary work. Because this is a study session, if there's any questions that come up between, we would love for you just to interrupt and we can answer as we go along. So if there's any questions on the current enrollment or capacity numbers, please let us know.
Can I ask a question?
Please do.
Okay, so when I look at Belen Soto, this is current, so their current capacity is 1,036. What will their capacity be with the new portables that will be put in place?
That's a great question. This is actually with the portables.
Oh, that's with the portables. Oh, okay. So the current capacity really is less
Their
than what we're seeing
current
here.
capacity is really less than what we're seeing. This is with the portables. They will be at 101%.
Okay, and the same is true for Verado L then?
Correct.
Okay, so there's still 122% capacity with the portables?
Correct.
Okay, just make sure I understand that. Thank you.
The next slide is our current open enrollment and waitlist numbers. This was a request from the committee, and so we felt like this was also important for you to be able to see. So these are our open enrollment numbers. We also provided you in a Friday update what those specific open enrollments were based on if they were in district, out of district, or staff children. So you do have that in one of your Friday updates. There were questions that arose around the waitlist numbers. Some of those are due to capacity at schools, but others are because they might be needing specialized instruction. They might be needing resource or speech. And if those are at capacity, even if there is room at the school, we may not be able to allow them in. So what you're looking at, waitlist numbers, specifically looking at Rancho Santa Fe, those likely all had some sort of special education request. And because we are full in special education at that campus, they wouldn't have been able to be approved. So our committee and community feedback changes. So these were the things we took back from our family engagement night. We took back from the Google form that we sent out to the entire district. Also email feedback as well as phone calls. Eric and I took a lot of phone calls from different families asking questions, providing feedback that way. We took all of this to our committee and we talked through the different things that we were seeing and hearing. And this is what the committee came back with, that they wanted 67D to go back to Palm Valley. That was, if you're looking at the maps, you do have maps in front of you. That was a little corner that is actually in Palm Valley. I guess you could call it in Palm Valley proper. And we were looking at moving those to Rancho Santa Fe. That was a large no, please. And so we were able to move that one back to Palm Valley. 64 A, B, and C. That is an interesting one. We were trying not to have to transport past the 303. However, we heard from families that we've been moved a lot, and that is true. This is a little community that gets moved every single time boundary changes come up. Currently in Agua Fria, they do go to Verado High School. That may change because we know Agua Fria is going to be doing boundary changes in the spring. But for now, we were continuing to honor where they're at now. Families just really wanted a stay put placement, and they were okay with continuing at Scott Libby and Verado Middle School for those that we heard from. And that continued to help the Verado Middle School if we were not moving Verado Heritage. So we were honoring that request from some of the families that we heard from. 30 C and D, we initially had considered moving them to Litchfield Elementary. And families said, why? Why are you moving us if we don't need to? So we said, you're right, we're not sure. So we moved them back to Maple Paget. 7A through G was originally going to go to Dreaming Summit. And same thing, we heard from families saying, can you please keep us where we are slotted? And we looked at our numbers and we were able to make that work. So we were trying to honor that. We heard from community that they really are okay with Verado Heritage as a K-8, and they are okay with the current capacity. We do know that they are over capacity. However, the principal, we've been able to talk with her. She feels like she can make it work with what they have. So we are recommending to leave Verado Heritage as a K-8 as is. We also looked at 24A. That was an interesting one. 24A has kind of been moved around a little bit. We originally had them going to Belen Soto. And due to the consistency there, as well as the amount of students that were going there, we moved them back to Verado Elementary and Verado Middle School. 31C and 31D were scheduled to attend Wigwam Creek. This was an interesting one because we were looking at Western Sky numbers and it was so large. This was the only grid codes from Dreaming Summit that were going to go to Wigwam Creek. And we had several families that said, we're fine with wherever you send our children. We'd just like them to be together. And so we were able to honor the having all of Dreaming Summit move to Western Sky. In order to make that Western Sky happen, we do need to move to a K-8 at either Litchfield or Palm Valley. We've chosen Palm Valley from the committee work, but in order to make room for the Dreaming Summit students, we need to do that. And then 25B, that's that little one in the map. When you're looking at that map, it's got Scott Libby written on it. What you're looking at is the purple is where students are currently attending. The color is the shaded area of where they will be going. So that 25B, we are having them attend Belen Soto K-8 is our recommendation. And then we'll also be talking about the phased in approach for many of the grade levels. Any questions about the committee work or the community feedback changes that have been made?
What has been, I know we've received a little bit of feedback on either the Palm Valley or the Litchfield K-8. I'm assuming we're going to talk about that a little bit more, but was there any specific community feedback after our last session about making that a K-8 or not?
Yeah, so interesting enough, we have had feedback on both sides. We've got parents who are really excited about the possibility of K-8, and we've got some parents who would rather their children go to a middle school. Eric and I went to Palm Valley and met with the Palm Valley staff. We have a few staff members who are concerned about what this could look like and making sure that we're considering all possibilities. We also had staff members stand up and say, please don't speak for me. I'm excited about the possibility of a K-8. So it's really a mixed review. We did not do that with Litchfield. Litchfield has not been on our dashboard as a committee since the very beginning. So this was only Palm Valley that we were looking at.
I think some of the pieces that come with that conversation was really, if we're gonna do it, to be prepared to do it right. We kind of talked about middle school bathrooms, where would those go? Just really expanding that vision. And so, of course, as we get deeper into this, we know that we'll meet with Dan Ensign, our Director of Facilities and Maintenance, along with those principals, to really dive in of what do you see that needs to be done? Easy for us to walk through and go, we think we need this, right? But when you walk those hallways and campus every day, you have probably a different list. So of course, I've talked with our operational people, our food services director, what are the things we need to make those changes? And so we'll continue to develop that list to really guide that work and then go, okay, what's a deadline look like to do these things?
There obviously are a lot of changes back in this particular slide that we're detailing. Is it your opinion and the committee's opinion that we're still accomplishing the overall goals that we're looking to accomplish, even though we kind of maybe went extreme and now we're pulling back a little bit? And I've looked at all the numbers, but I just want to make sure that we're not pulling back so far that we're going to have to do this again.
Yeah, I go back to what I started with of knowing we have to make moves and how could we do it with the least amount of disruption. And hearing this from a different lens is we have really lived in these grid codes and maps a lot over the last few months to go, okay, that's 38 kids at that school. That drives it up maybe 4% or 6%. Is that okay to leave them that 38 kids here and drive it up a couple percent there? It is. And that's really what comes from this is the percentages might have been shifted from one to the other. We weren't going to be able to do it both, right? Where the goal would be, how can we make all 15 schools, right, utilize the capacity at a really good number? We know, looking at this, what a 10-year plan really looks like, because the future enrollment projections are showing we're going to have to do some other work, right? Would that come with a major boundary change like this? We don't believe so. Could it come with some small minor things? Definitely. But this really landed us in a place that we felt 10 years out, we're looking at, okay, this area, what can we do there to kind of fix the middle corridor, which is really where all our growth is focused. And Dan and I and his team have had those conversations. What does it look like, right? We are pretty confident. We won't build a new school due to a population needing school number 18. Now, could that change? Of course, but currently with the data we have, we're pretty comfortable saying this is going to be one for a long time. But now do we do a remodel or a rebuild of something where we already know we have land that could still continue to impact that central corridor? So yes, this is something that we believe will truly benefit us long-term with very minimal movement in the future.
I would say, to add to what Eric just shared, the only concern is still Verado Heritage. They are going to be over capacity. They do feel very comfortable and confident with running those numbers. And when we look at the demographers' work, it doesn't look like they're going to get that much higher. So if they're okay with where they're at, it doesn't look like that's going to change that much, but that is the one area that we will not be providing that additional support.
Okay, so I have two questions on Verado Heritage. My first question is for CFO Vaughn. So that school is over capacity. Does that mean that campus is more profitable?
Yeah, yes is the short answer. Because revenue for the school district is driven entirely by student count, right? And when you're looking at profitability of a school, it's kind of a unique concept to even think about. But if you're going to explore it, what you're really looking at is, I'm going to use some accounting terms for a second, the fixed costs of having certain types of staff. So that would be the type of staff that you're staffing pretty much separate from student count. You know, every school is going to have a principal. Our staffing standard says if you're a K-8, you're going to have an assistant principal. You're going to have certain things. Those aren't necessarily driven by student count. And so when you're looking at profitability of a school, what you're really looking at is the revenue that those students are bringing in against the cost of those fixed costs, but then also looking at, are you putting enough kids in a classroom that you're at least also paying for that teacher? And so in the sense of an overcrowded school versus an undercrowded school, we're not necessarily providing significant additional staff from a fixed cost perspective. And so those additional students are making that school more profitable. Does that make sense?
Yes. So one could say that if Verado Heritage likes the way that they're operating, that's actually beneficial to some of our other campuses and other schools. Okay, my second question about Verado Heritage is, I hear what you're saying about the principals saying, we've got this, the parents saying, leave us alone, and the fact that they have A rating, on the surface, it all looks like this is working. But there is just a little piece of me that says, is this really in the best interest of students? Even if it's self-imposed and they think it's in the best interest of their students, is it really in the best interest to be that far over capacity? What are your thoughts on that?
It's a great question. I think so we would have to look at what is at stake because they are over capacity. So typically the first things that would go would be specials on a cart. If they already have a specials on a cart and the specials teachers are okay with that, that's a very common practice that can be done. They have not lost their library. They have not lost some of those other spaces. The interventions, another thing that Mr. Vaughn has done is made sure that interventions have classrooms. So they might have all of their interventions in one room instead of being separated out and providing that maybe a less crowded room for interventions. They don't have math specialists on that campus, but they do have a reading specialist. So the reading specialist may have her own classroom or she might share with a resource teacher, depending. So those are the things that they're giving up, having the overcapacity. Is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, we came to this table with this concern, not only about undercapacity, but overcapacity. And so when you look at that, is it detrimental to them? I think the easy answer is academically no, right? Because we know they're very successful academically. The instruction is going well. And that's just one North Star in education. Is there concerns that their classrooms are larger? I think because we have a board directed class size, that really helps, right? We've not flooded classrooms with kids because of that. And so we're just maximizing the usage of all spaces there. And so that as high as it is, it's, I always think about, I student taught in a 7th grade science class and I had 42 kids, 5 of them sat on the counter in the home ec classroom at the back of my class. That's detrimental to kids. I don't believe we're in that situation today because of the board directed class size. So.
Okay, and for Verado Heritage, are we saying based on these projected numbers, it doesn't look like we will bring this back to the table in 3 years? Or are we reserving the right to say if the need arises and somehow we get you to 130% capacity, where that number looks like, this may be resurrected? So just keep that in your mind, parents and teachers at Verado Heritage.
I would say it's never off the table, right? We know where the growth is. And we want to continue to make sure that our diligence is looking at doing right by kids and staff every year. Do we want to do boundary changes every year? No, thanks, right? But that's why we've really spent so much time trying to be cognizant of all the moves that could impact. And so we don't have a set capacity percentage of mind to go, oh, this is going to trigger it. But it will be something that I know with Mr. Vaughn and myself, we will always continue to look at. Are we doing the best for kids? And are we running out of space, right? I mean, we think of schools right now that we can't give them a teacher because they couldn't put them anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we get in that spot, if it becomes consistently there year after year, we would have to say, yeah, let's continue to say, is this best or not? And here would be some options.
Great, thank you.
You know, so as we get into this, of course, School 17 drives a huge part of this conversation. And we have a location. We safely can say the anticipated opening is the 2027 school year. Doesn't mean we won't shoot for sooner, but you know, I don't like to overpromise and not be able to achieve it. And so Mr. Ensign and I will definitely continue to strive for something sooner. But we have to start with boundaries there, because I go back to the central corridor of our district running north to south is a big reason why we're doing this work. And so what are the boundary grid codes that go along with it, along with their projected enrollment capacity numbers, and then our recommendation of what that should be. And when we get into it, right, this is the projection. When you look at this document, very similar to the other one, We did not put the 3-year projected numbers as we did the 3-year projected capacity numbers. But with the boundaries that we will recommend for school 17, you could see they get pretty full pretty quick. And the moves that will come along with that recommendation, because as we set that, you have to adjust everything else, which has been the work we worked on, projected not with open enrollment numbers, right? We definitely have those because we think it's important, as we heard, that it can benefit schools and districts, right? By having those kids be here, and we don't want to kick them out. They've been here, they've chosen us for a reason. So how do we embrace them? But this would be if we kicked off the school year with all the changes next year, right? Here it is, non-open enrollment. Questions?
Just for clarification, when I look at the projected capacity, the first number is next school year, so fall of 24. And then it's 25 and 26. It's consecutive years?
2027, 2028, and then 2032, 2033.
Okay, so it's 1, 3, 5.
Yes.
I have a question about the Rancho Santa Fe.
Mhm.
How does it go from 75 to 59, 61, 56? Like a school at 50% capacity?
Yes, Rancho Santa Fe has been a concern of ours, and we do have a few ideas on the table and we've kind of mentioned those as possibly considering an early childhood center or some other type of magnet program there. Rancho Santa Fe is kind of in the similar situation as El Tomasec, where we're looking at 50% capacity. This is the numbers without our open enrollment, so we will be showing you a slide that shows what our capacity is with open enrollment. But that school does, we have been concerned about that one as well.
And obviously it means we did not keep the exact same boundaries that are currently there. Right, there's a slight change to those. To Corte, which is a lot closer to their house than what it is at Rancho. And they've been at Rancho for a long time. And so we've definitely feel it's best to get them there as the years roll out, the trend starts to become, where's the next spot to look at for us to really hone in on? And you know, when we chose LTH as what we think is that best scenario, is it is on the corner of our district. That one closer to Northern Parkway, an opportunity for open enrollment in other areas. When you pan down and look at Rancho Santa Fe, it's on that other side, right next to Avondale, allowing us to, what do we do there to increase that through open enrollment? Because we're capturing most of those kids there already, but it's definitely one of the older communities that has not turned over. And so the generations have stayed. And very capable for us to leave the boundaries as they are and keep that percentage at 64. Right? And that goes back to we moved that little chunk of 67 for 38 kids that are bused currently to Palm Valley, but now we're just going to bus them to Rancho Santa Fe for 4%. Is that really what's best when we think we can in the future address the undercapacity there with something that benefits our district in other ways? So yeah, you are correct. It is, but with open enrollment, right? On a few slides, we'll see that improve a little bit.
Well, and if you're also looking at the map, the Rancho Santa Fe is the pink. There's the 55B. We did initially move it to Corte Sierra because that would make more sense. Also, Litchfield would make sense for that. However, because the numbers were so low at Rancho, we decided to keep it where it was. It's kind of that awkward spot. It doesn't quite fit where it is, but we were concerned about moving those 53 students and taking them out of Rancho and putting Rancho in the 300s.
Ms. Clymer, I know you were thinking about chiming in.
My question was actually about open enrollment, and that's the
Perfect.
next slide. So
Awesome.
Thanks.
So as we dig in and know that we have 700 plus students on open enrollment, how do they play into the grand scheme of things, right? And so this slide demonstrates the first of next year with all recommended changes and open enrollment. Obviously, school 17 is new. And so the 443 kids wouldn't even be there because it's not built yet, but they would be at LTH. But you can see how it improves the capacity numbers of our schools compared to the last slide.
We aren't able to project open enrollment, so we actually use just exactly what we have. So we took the projected numbers and then we just added those to each school site with what they currently have for open enrollment. We know that in our district, open enrollment is completed each year. So those numbers that if you're seeing something very high, Western Sky is one of those. We may have to look at those open enrollments and deny more if necessary. We would provide other options in Litchfield, but we know that parents are possibly choosing Western Sky for a reason. So that also could come to play.
The Verrado Heritage number can be a little scary. What is not completely predicted in it in the projections is the cohorts that we've talked about. They have a large 8th grade group rolling out, and their most recent kindergarten groups rolling in are quite a bit smaller. So I would be shocked if they were this, if we said, yes, everybody's coming back, that it would be this high. I think it would be a little bit lower. So. You want to chime in?
Used to this microphone. It is somewhat interesting to note that Western Sky was the only school I was about to say this past year because I've been living in the future so much, this current year, where not all open enrollment students who applied to continue at the school got back in. So we have experienced that in the past, at least this year. So it wouldn't be anything entirely new for us. This year, we did work very closely with each individual principal to try to see where we could get everyone back in, because obviously we want to honor the families who have chosen us as much as we possibly can, while also obviously protecting the educational quality for those students who live in our boundaries. But I just wanted to share that we did have a handful of students this past year who were not able to continue at Western Sky.
As we dig into some areas that came out of all the feedback was a phased approach. We know our committee talked a lot about that. It was actually kind of split of do it all now versus let's do a phased approach to the best of your ability. That was conversations we also had, and of course some of the feedback that we received. And so we got into that to really think what does that look like? And I think the hard part was it's not a one size fits all, right? It is what can we do with a phased approach that is good for kids? And this is kind of what came from it. Of course, the work at LTH, we would not dive into an academy magnet school. We want to research and get community feedback before we really start to have that conversation. But when that time comes, we want to make sure that we've done the diligence with Dr. Doozy and principals and training and whatnot. So that's obviously easy to say, we're going to wait on that one. The LTH families, we could allow the opportunity for the current 6th and 7th graders, the ones there today, stay next year as 7th and 8th graders. And then only send the 6th graders, current 5th graders, to the new middle schools. So it'd be normal for them. The new school would be more normal, right? Obviously, if their siblings went to LTH, it would be different for them that way, but they wouldn't be going to one middle school and then another one a year later. And that would, when we looked at that last slide, the capacity of Western Skies, it's up there, but the phase-in approach would would not allow it to jump that high that quickly, allowing for some proper things to be done. Of course, that 7th and 8th grade student rollout could happen at Verrado Middle School as well. And even possible at Valencia Elementary, those kids would be able to stay. And then that would show us recommending that only the K-5 kids go out to the new school from current Valencia boundaries that become the new school boundaries. Palm Valley, we would recommend that they only keep their 6th graders, right? We wouldn't bring junior high kids back from a junior high to go back to Palm Valley. That could be very difficult. 2 different environments. And so they're already there knowing 7th, 8th is going to stay at LTH. We could leave 7th and 8th at Western Skyway, Guam Creek, and allow Palm Valley to roll into a K6, the following year a K7, and then the following year a K8. Also, giving Mr. Ensign and I time to make sure we make the campus changes appropriately and not just hastily because we know we got to get it done. The 6th graders from Dreaming Summit would move to, like I said, Western Skylon with the Barbara Roby kids. And then the other ones would come to fruition starting next year. You want to see numbers before how that
No, I
works?
just have a
Okay.
question about the campus. I guess specifically Palm Valley, because it's the one that's probably changing the most in terms of physical changes on the campus. So next year you would have 6th graders. Currently 6th graders can be involved in sports and other middle school activities. So will that be an option for them there because there's only one?
We would still
grade
honor sports and all of the other opportunities that they have in the 6th grade.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, it would only be weird for a year or two, but I just
Right.
thought at least for those kids that are moving to that, they at least want to stay equal to their peers. So when they do have a 7th and 8th grade year and more people are there, they would be still available to do that. Okay, thank you.
I would say the only additional piece that has caused Eric and I some concern is for Palm Valley, we're looking at doing a phased approach, 24, 25, 25, 26, 27, 28. Doing that for Belen Soto, the numbers are going to be far too high. So we definitely can do it for a year. Our concern is what does this look like the following year? Verrado Middle is fine to do it for the following year. L. Thomas Heck is a concern. Do we want to only allow 8th graders or do we want them to have peers? So those are things that we will need to talk through with this phased approach. It could work. We're doing it at Palm Valley with only 6th grade and then moving to 7th, but they would be the only 8th grade middle school. Is that something we're okay with? So something to think about. We've gone back and forth. We've talked about this for hours on end, but it is a concern of ours.
Question about that, though. You said that they would be the only 8th graders there. However, we're looking at in another year having the magnet school
That is
be
true.
there. So there could be 8th graders there that they would be able to interact with.
That
in
is very
regard.
true.
So-
Yes.
Could be. Yep.
Okay, so just so we're really clear, can you walk me through on your recommendations, what is happening year by year at the LTH campus?
And we'll go to the maps. So LTH next year would be K-5 for the new boundary school 17 kids. And then 7th and 8th graders who are at LTH. Current families that reside in the boundaries for them. Okay. The following year, it would be a K-6 of the school 17 boundary kids. We could leave the 8th graders there from LTH as the only group of original LTH kids left and implement the magnet school at the same time. Kind of running 3 schools on one campus. It's doable. To what extent, be talked about, but it really would be, in my opinion, what's the magnet school look like? And if there's 200, I think it's 204 7th graders this year, that would be 8th graders then. And then do we have 20 magnet school students as well in 8th grade? So that would kind of be what it looks like. And then the following year, there would be no LTH students there. There would be possibly the last year of school 17. and the magnet school, or just the magnet school, depending on the magic of Mr. Ensign and I.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So when you say 3 schools in one, wouldn't, I mean, I understand what you mean by that, but I want to be really clear to your point. I mean, I understand that the magnet school will be different, but the remaining original LTH students and the school 17 students would be intermixed. I mean, they wouldn't be separated out.
They wouldn't have any 8th graders though, because we're starting them as a K-5, so it would be a K-6 that year. And so there would be a gap of 7th graders not there or very few. And so that's kind of why it looks like that. But yeah, it's not really 3 schools, but
I mean, they're all, you know, the K-8 that would be there, even though there's a grade or 2 missing.
Yep.
They would all be treated as one K-8. It's not like you're going to have,
yeah, you would.
you know what I mean? They're not going to be separated in any way. They're just different grades, like any normal school, but there wouldn't be any other separation. Okay.
Well, actually, is that true? Because wouldn't we be picking a planning principal that would be running that school and getting their families, getting that culture going? Isn't that the point of having all those kids together starting now before they have a campus? So they wouldn't necessarily have the same everything.
That
right?
has been our conversation of how do we do that. Keeping the kids together is an important piece. It's not the driving factor. Driving factor is they don't have room at Belen Soto. And so it's twofold, right? It's how do you do that and take care of the new community at the same time? And do we then do what we've done in the past where you have a planning principle? And so I can't tell you we've solved that mystery yet.
I'd say the other piece that we're talking about is if it's a magnet school, depending on what type of magnet school, they may not be having classes together based on what we choose. So if it's an IB program, that might not be appropriate for everybody to be in IB classes. Doesn't mean that they couldn't have lunch together and specials together and things like that. But there could be 2 separate schools on a campus where I know we have done this in the past. We had El Thomas Heck when it was being built, bused to Verado Middle School. And so that was a long bus ride. And students did do that. And it was just one campus. They all became the Mustangs. And so if we don't have the magnet there, I think that's easy to do. If we do have the magnet, based on whatever it is, that could be a little bit complicated. If it's a STEM program or something like that, that would be an easy one to bring everybody in together. But if it's like an IB or something like that, it might be a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, I don't have any issue with that. I mean, if it's a magnet school or a specialized educational program, makes sense to have them separate. I guess I am more uncomfortable with having 3 unique leaders on one campus. That place is just not big enough. I mean, that's too many cooks in the kitchen. So you have the school 17 planning principal, then you have the remaining LTH principal with limited students. Then you have the magnet school, which is going to be the future, you know what I mean? Whether that's the LTH principal or somebody else. I have some concerns with that, but I understand the process. So I'll let you guys play that out. But I'm just, as I'm hearing that, I'm like, that seems like a lot of people for very limited number of students, but we'll leave that until we get there.
And it's kind of why we go back to that. We don't think this phased out approach can be done for everyone all years throughout
Yeah.
it, right? Trying to do what's right by kids in that sense. And of course, staffing, right, is important.
I somehow missed where the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders from school 17 go.
That we have enough room at Verado Middle School that they could
Okay.
stay at Verado Middle School or Belen Soto where they're at. We don't have enough room to keep the K-5 and the 6-8 at Belen Soto. So great question.
Nope, I knew they were somewhere. Thanks.
We won't lose them, I promise.
President Zeidman, if I can add to the conversation, I think just as a board and as a community, we are going to be charged with being good stewards of our resources, and that being human capital, because just the building of a new campus due to growth in a certain part of the community doesn't necessarily equate for more kids as in the entire district. So that also doesn't mean we have more money to get more people. So we're going to have to be really mindful of who we can attract back and what those resources look like as well.
So it takes us to our next slide of projected enrollment for phased approach with open enrollment. Like the whole kit and caboodle, right? It's these phased out pieces with open enrollment kids. Of course, where they currently are, we can't predict that. But it's a pretty good projection of where we could be today with the same stuff. And you can see the capacities look pretty good for the most part. With some future work to be done, I go back to, is this the end all be all? We know it's not, but it would get us to a spot that we wouldn't be looking to do all the boundaries again. If enrollment declines or increases, we would be able to build that next step out in 8 to 10 years.
Wouldn't some of this capacity be in the magnet school?
Yes,
Quite possibly.
that is true.
Right, so there's other school that's not on
Mhm.
here.
You would hope
Yes.
that we were attracting 500 plus kids there, right? 650, 700 if you're Mr. Bond.
Well, and hopefully we would draw some from our overcrowded campuses to the magnet, which would be a win-win.
Yep.
Yes.
Sir.
I
This is-
think, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think one of the reasons it may be wise to underestimate the movement to the magnet school is a couple of different reasons. One, it'd be very difficult to guess who's going to choose to apply to be at the magnet school and where they currently reside. But also one of the goals of the magnet school would be to bring in students we're not currently serving, right? Because to Dr. Davidson's point, depending on which forecast you're looking at, or if you're looking at what we've actually experienced the past couple of years, our enrollment as an overall district has actually been relatively flat. And as I shared earlier, and as I've talked about many times, the resources we actually get are based on total district enrollment. This is very important work, but in terms of what the state provides us to actually provide our services, it doesn't come into play. And so part of the goal would be to either attract back some of those 3,000 students that we know are attending other schools that do live in our boundaries, or one of the benefits of the LTH location is that it is on the edge of our community, and so is in a prime location to potentially attract other students who do not presently attend our schools, to get those additional resources for all of our students.
I would share as we look at a magnet school, their success doesn't come from just opening the K6, K8. It's really a long-term piece. We want to get them at kindergarten, because when you start them there, we know that they understand what we are doing for their kids at such a high level that you don't lose them anymore, right? And so you would typically see larger primary grade levels than you would the middle school area. Of course, when families move, they don't typically move just one of the multiple kids, but there are that do. And so I would anticipate that we see a larger group at the younger grades, just from past experiences.
So we know that this is not a voting night. However, we did want to make sure that you knew what our recommendations were moving forward. We are recommending that the boundary changes as proposed, allowing for the phased-in approach to minimize overall student disruption. We also looked at School 17 and what that could be. Could it be a K5? Could it be a 6-8? Or does it need to be a K8? And after looking at that, we do have the numbers below to show that Belen Soto, and we used School 17 and Belen Soto because they are so close together. If we were to make one of those a K5, you can see that by 2032, those numbers are just way too high for a K5 elementary school. Middle school looks kind of pretty. Middle school, it could have worked, but the K5 is the complicated piece. So we're recommending that School 17 be a K8 due to these numbers.
Sorry, can you explain that to me again? I'm
Sure.
not following this. Right.
All right. When we were looking at this, we know that we could look at several different boundaries. However, what we were looking at because of the proximity was Belen Soto, looking at those numbers, and School 17 numbers. So when we're looking at our grid codes and looking at School 17 and looking at Belen Soto, we look to see what would the K-5 numbers be if we combine those, and what would the 6-8 numbers be. When we did that, the middle school numbers would be 720 between those two schools and by 2032. And the elementary K-5 would be 1268.
And some of how that came to fruition was Belen Soto was also built as a K-5. So it's
Yeah.
easy to start there and go, hey, we've done that throughout our history. What does it look like if we said, okay, let's build the next middle school? Those were the numbers for those populations there. And not a whole lot of room to move the primary K-5 kids somewhere else. And so that's kind of how we fall to the K-8, which we've never built a K-8. And so we don't, it would
Okay.
give us the most flexibility.
Okay. My only reservation with that is if we build a K-8 school, then I feel as though we're locked into a K-8 school. And I know there's more talk long-term on the west side of the district that Scott Libby might become something else down the road. So I feel like we're going to have 3 K-8s, and obviously Heritage could become a K-5 at some point. Belen could become a K-5 at some point, but we're now saying we're going to have 3 K-8s on the west side of the district, 1 on the east side of the district. 2. Well, the magnet, yes, but
Yes.
we have no idea what that
Yes.
looks like at this point. So
Correct.
that's not really,
Yes. True story.
We'll get to that at some point. I don't know. I just feel like it's locking us in because I feel like if we built a new middle school, it would be so amazing that people would want to go to that school. Cause I think the location, the fact that it's close to Canyon View, all of that would also be really appealing to people. So I understand why these numbers are what they are, and it's because of the K-5, but I can't help thinking that 4 or 5 years from now, we might be saying, darn, I wish we had built a fabulous, beautiful middle school, and Scott Libby would, or maybe we'll end up saying Scott Libby would be a middle school. I don't know.
One of-
go ahead. No, I just want to make sure I'm reading this correctly. So you're saying that in 2032, between Belen Soto and School 17, you'd have 1,268 K-5 kids between the two of them. So if you add those together, you have roughly 2,000 students. So right now, Belen Soto has 1,000 students, and the new school, we're going to build it. I'm sure it's going to look the same as Belen Soto, as Verado Heritage and all the rest of them. You make for 1,000. So why does it have to be a K-8 if you can just build it? You see what I'm saying? Like, it seems like the numbers that we currently have would be this equivalent if you just separated them out. It's just because the grades aren't.
One of the other
separated.
things we looked at though is Verado Middle still has room. So building another middle school when there's already quite a bit of room over there at a middle school made it a little bit more complicated. The K-8 model, you don't need as many middle school classrooms as you would in a big middle
Yeah.
school like
Yeah.
Verado Middle. So that was one of the other things that we were looking at. Technically, we could move more students to Verado Middle School and still be okay. Even with the phased approach, they're not even meeting the 90%.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
if we were to build another middle school over there, what does that do to Verado Middle?
Understood.
Ms. Benjamin, Mr. Stone, just out of, when we talked about this before, to Ms. Moran's point, if we built a big middle school, I remember the conversation saying, yeah, we could do that, but then we would need a school 18 in the future for elementary age students. Can you clarify that for me?
Obviously, when you see 1,268 K-5 kids, knowing we built a middle school there, we don't have any more room to put another portable or another building at Belen Soto. Some of the work done here reduces most of the long transportation trips. We kind of used the 303 as that guide, except for that one community. And we expanded, so we did the middle school. You would start to then go back to that large amount of transportation work that has kind of hindered us becoming a really good transportation department until we're there, right? Until this is, the capacity pieces are looked at appropriately and we're not driving as far as some of these trips take us. So could we? We sure could. But we already can see that we would be over in the elementary range. And we don't really have anywhere to move them. When you get into the numbers of Mabel Pageant, the future has them at 101% capacity, which is not what they're currently at. With the projected phase in and the open enrollment, that's pretty much the next closest school. We know Scott Libby currently a little low, but with the open enrollment possible numbers, it's 91%. And when you really look long term to them, that continued growth there, they get over to about 108%. So once again, the concentration of that central corridor that I talked about early on really hinders us from going, let's build a middle school and roll the dice. But I love the idea, right? Like it would be the newest middle school in the district. And that could be pretty cool.
I think,
'Cause
I think we could have a
our-
pretty cool K-8 school though. Why not make it a pretty cool K-8 school?
I did say that we've never built one. So as Ms. Clymer stated, it would be another Belen Soto. I don't know that it would because we didn't put any effort into that for junior high kids. It doesn't have a science lab like our science labs at our middle schools. It doesn't have a gym with wood floor courts. I'm not saying we would do those things, right? Because it would be these conversations of what is best for this community, this school build, and cost. Because we don't have unlimited resource and the state has given us zero. So looking at all those things, we've just tried to live in that world of what is truly providing Litchfield Elementary School District the most flexibility for the longest amount of time. And that's why we landed on the K-8.
The other thing I would add to that, if you look at the very long term, or at least as far out as the demographer goes, when they make projections, they do have us growing until I believe it's 2032, but they have us plateauing at that point. And so I would question a logic of building a structure that would cause us to need a school 18, because based on the data we have today, I honestly think school 17 could be Litchfield Elementary School District's last school, at least as far as new build for new community. And so building a K-8 would allow us to service all of those families in that community. Whereas building a middle school, we'd have to try to figure out where to send those K-5 kids, and we just don't have a logical home for them at this time.
I would just add that I think from a strategic standpoint, looking further out, if we have each corner or close to corner of our district on the extremes have a K-8 campus, that does allow us a lot more flexibility for when we do plateau to try to meet the needs of potentially drawing more people in. So that I think is a pro for the K-8 as well in that location.
Hadn't thought about that. Thank you.
Does that keep Belen Soto as a K-8 also? It would just keep them both
It
the
keeps
way, I
them
mean,
both
start the new
as
one as a K-8 and keep Belen Soto as a K-8 now. Okay.
Correct.
So as we move through it, you have the maps in front of you. These are the boundaries that support those movements in both the elementary and the middle K-8 world. And then that brings us to like the impacts, the ongoing impacts of our current reality in areas of Title I and academics and that. So
Can I ask a
let's stand-
question
yep.
before we get to that?
Nope, perfect.
Not to throw a big monkey wrench in there, and I'm not asking you to change anything, but can somebody explain to me, you said we'd have to make either Litchfield or Palm Valley a K-8. Why Litchfield is not the recommendation? Just thinking they already have a gym with nice floors and things like that, so.
So when you're looking at the K-5 map, that is the one with Litchfield there. We did look at this and we do believe that the footprint at Litchfield is beautiful for the possibility of a K-8. What the committee and what we were struggling with was the boundaries for Litchfield Elementary School are also in the Western Sky boundaries. So students would be in the backyard of Western Sky or would actually have to walk past that school to come here. And we felt that that could become problematic with getting students to actually be here for the K-8 when they're walking past a middle school to get here. In Palm Valley's neighborhood, that's just the transportation, that's the route. They're not passing any middle school to go there. We do agree that this footprint at Litchfield Elementary is set up where it could be an easier transition. And that's not wrong, but we were worried that open enrollments for Western Sky would decrease, or that would increase, and that students just wouldn't come here because their home, their backyard is Western Sky. So it was really about location.
Okay, thank you.
Early on, we do have some numbers that I'll share with you later about looking at it that way. That was, of course, everyone felt the same way. You know, it's been a K-12, right? We are on the football field. Like, there's just pieces of it that does make sense. Logistically, I know transportation kind of struggled having that many buses coming in. It does then kind of split the district with 3 middle schools across the middle of that side of us. And all of that movement just felt like the middle of it wasn't the best place for it.
So we will go through these slides. However, if you have specific questions, we do have the experts in the room with us. So we may ask our directors to come up if there is specific questions you have related to their things. The first one is, how does this impact Title I? Title I will be primarily impacted by L. Thomas Heck. If we're changing that to be a magnet, it will likely lose the Title I status. Although with the phased approach, we might be able to keep it for another year. So that is one of the largest changes. However, because of the changes of students going to Western Sky from Dreaming Summit and also Palm Valley, both of those could become Title I's based on how many students enroll with free and reduced lunch. So we would be watching those very closely. Any questions on the Title I impact?
Just one really quick with LTH. I know later in the presentation, we talk about staffing and how we don't anticipate there being, any loss of staffing, maybe just moving of staffing, which is good. If I know we do have some campuses that are Title I that are able to use additional funds for staffing purposes because that's what it's designed for specific interventions, et cetera. If we aren't able to hold on to it for another year as we phase those kids out, does that staffing still hold true even if we lose that status? Do you understand what I'm asking?
So if the funding for that staff is paid for by Title I, then they would likely not be able to stay at that campus if that's not what's chosen based on the staffing model. But we anticipate that there will be plenty of spaces and places across the district to make sure that we don't believe that anyone will be riffed or lose their job based on the boundary changes.
Yeah, okay, that was my question. Thank you.
I can talk for a second on how Title I funding works if you'd like. I'll try to make it quick in case you don't like, but so what it can actually fluctuate quite a bit year to year. And the reason that is how the state allocates Title I dollars to districts is based on a proportionate share statewide of free and reduced lunch children. And so our schools really can see quite a bit of fluctuation every year. And so that staffing, it's fairly stable, but you do see movement each year as schools either lose or gain Title I funding. And that could, quite frankly, not have anything to do with Litchfield numbers, but more so what's happening across the state. But each individual school is given a Title I allocation. And so the loss of LTH as a Title I status wouldn't necessarily impact any school other than LTH directly. But most of the staffing that is out of Title I is classified team members. And as I'll certainly talk to you about in January, we have a a decent chunk of classified openings, that we'd be more than welcome to have them continue on our team, just in those different roles, even if the additional funding from Title I were to decline.
All right, so we do know that there will also be an impact on our ELD programming. With the change of students going to Dreaming Summit and from Dreaming Summit to Western Sky and Barbara Roby to Wigwam Creek, we know that that number would increase. We also know that at Palm Valley, as we continue to extend going into a 6 through 8, that there would also be extended ELD numbers there. We would anticipate that additional aid support might be needed at those. However, with the L. Thomas Heck decreasing, we think that it would come out to be fairly stable. Any questions on ELD? Okay. Working with Brian on the academic achievement, the majority of our campuses will not be highly impacted by these changes. Western Sky may be impacted with the addition of the ELD students. However, that would not change if we were to use this year's, it would not have changed their letter grade. So there would still be an impact on it. It may have decreased a little bit, but the letter grade would still be an A. All of our campus letter grades look like they would be stable with the boundary changes. Any questions on that one? All right, and then special education, our specialized programs should not be impacted by boundary changes. However, I did want to have a caveat in there that Director Aiken is looking at special education capacities in different school campuses. So there may be some changes anyways, but this would have nothing to do with boundaries. What we're trying to do is create consistency for kindergarten through 8th grade. So for example, not that this is one that will happen, but at Litchfield Elementary School, they have a kindergarten sales program, but it's the only kindergarten sales here. So if we can move that to a campus that is going to be housing K through 8 sales where the child would not have to move, then that's what we're going to try and do. It does not impact the specialized programs though. We are really making sure that we have stability in our specialized programs. Resource will be happening at any campus that is not impacted. So if a child that has an IEP and they're receiving resource support and they are a part of the boundary change, then they would receive that at the new school that they're going to.
One small piece that kind of comes out of school 17 is in the planning stages, we could plan for the ability to open the door to a special ed program there that we know we don't necessarily have everywhere. Correct?
Correct. And you
Correct.
just made Paige very happy.
So our K-8s do capacity, they have resource students, but nothing specialized. And we know capacities, you move programs to those schools that are under capacity, which means we just, our students from the Verrado area, we bus them a long way. And so this could open the door to minimize that busing for them. Now, of course, you got to build it at the right cost. So. Transportation. You know, initially, there were some bold moves, and I've gotten to talk to a lot of people who've been around Litchfield for a long time, and hearing from some people about busing LTH students to Verrado Middle when they were getting ready to open. Okay, this isn't new. We've done it, right? It's not ideal. We don't love it, but we do know there's an end in sight with it. And a lot of our work here was guided with transportation in mind, because we know nationally there's a problem in the amount of drivers there. Pre-COVID, we had over 8,000 school bus drivers, and post-COVID, we're below 4,500 as a country. And so we're living it, right? We know. And how can we be more efficient? And of course, we took step one by purchasing a new software that allows us to be more efficient in planning routes compared to what we've done in the past. And then this work will allow us to continue to really drill down to the best efficient routes and not having, we will always determine if we could scale down once the year starts, but the process in the future will hopefully start us off in a much better way. As you've heard me share, we route for 5,200 students, but we only bus no more than 2,300 at one time. That means we have some buses with some capacity. And all with this in mind and the new routing software, we'll be leading by capacity initially to ensure that instead of routing or creating 52 routes, maybe we've only created 42 because we did a much better job just by having current software that talks really well with our student information system. So we know things are going to come up from these moves. And when we talk about the phased approach, you might have a family who's got a sixth grader and eighth grader that's supposed to go to LTH, and we're taking the sixth grader to Western Sky, and mom goes, I want them to go together to Western Sky. Well, bus is already coming to pick up the sixth grader. We're going to take your eighth grader too, right? We will make sure that we handle those scenarios case by case to meet the needs of our community to the best of our ability. There is a piece that we do have to look at the start end times as I evaluate the number of schools we have at each one of those. We have 3 tiers, an early one, a middle, and then a late run. It's not very equitable, and that brings its own concerns to the routes. And so we will drill into that to make sure if we need to make some adjustments, we'll get ahead of that and have those conversations to do so. And then, as we talk about cost of things, the routing system is near the purchase. It's not finalized, and couldn't open it up for you today, but we're close to it, having that money encumbered to do so. Mr. Vaughn, did you want to add something? I know you're okay. Of course, facilities is a major driver with this. And early on, we sat with Mr. Ensign and said, knowing your experience and institutional knowledge of Litchfield, don't allow us to go stray from saying we can do something that puts you in a bind, right? Making a K5 a K8 can take some time. And as you start to think of things, a lot of things come up. Are the bathroom counter heights low enough for primary students? Maybe not. Is the serving line in the cafeteria low enough for primary students? Maybe not. And so all of these things, of course, as I shared earlier, we will meet with the principals that will have impacted campuses along with our directors in the operation world to map that out. We will walk campuses to ensure we've looked at the checklist of all things to ensure when we open, it is functional for all of our students. And that helps with the phased approach. We were comfortable with some things early on, but of course the phased approach helps us to do that. We would have to move some desks and chairs because our junior high kids don't sit in the same ones as our K3 or 4-5, and traffic flow patterns of campuses. We've had concerns on campuses already since I've been here, met with local PD, and they want one thing and we want something else. And I've always landed with, we'll make the final decision, but we will include some people that weren't there, such as a city engineer, right? The schools were built certain ways with plans. And sometimes our officers are like, you need to do this. And I'm like, I don't disagree with you, but that's a short-term fix. And that then puts the problem somewhere else. And we want to make sure when we do this, it's holistically to minimize those things. And then of course, our people, right? We talk a lot about students, but at the heart of this, it is our people who have gotten us to the success of our district. And we know Mr. Vaughn and the HR team is diligently working up staffing models, and Ms. Benjamin and I have thrown a wrench in all of that, right, with this. And at the end of the day, we want to take care of our people. We don't want anyone to go anywhere. And those will be ongoing conversations. I was glad to hear that Mr. Vaughn and Mr. Coley will have one-on-one conversations with our principals when they roll out staffing, right? To have that first conversation with them, as we know our principals have the best relationships with our staff because they're with them every day, right? And so we do not believe anyone will lose their job. As we've seen some staffing models now of just predictive numbers, the annual rollover of people leaving, moving, those things will be in a place that allows us to continue to keep those. Of course, some might have to move campuses. That is a possibility. Once again, going back to that one-on-one conversation with those principals really allow us to do that in an intimate environment that is empathetic to what we have to do, because the impact to the kids is also impact to our staff, and we want to make sure we do that right.
And I just wanted to add, because I think it's easy to get these two things mixed up together, and it's just because they're two very meaty things that we're working on at the same time. These boundaries truly have zero impact on implemented staffing standards. It would not change the number of jobs. What it would potentially change is the location. Now, because you're getting higher capacity at some campuses, you may end up with more teachers there, right? Because of our board approved class size. But what Eric is very kindly giving you a preview to is even our recommendations under our staffing standards for next year, looking at our budget cuts, and our preliminary numbers there are even that we don't believe anyone who currently works for us who would want to continue would be losing their job. We would have a spot for them. But I do think it's important to note that these boundary changes truly don't impact jobs. What it does do is impact location of jobs, because it impacts location of children. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, so historically, our teachers and staff have been hired at a particular location, and their assumption is that they would continue at that location. What would you say to those teachers and staff that would say moving locations is not what I signed up for? I don't know who wants to answer that. Maybe Dr. Davidson, I'm not sure. You want to answer it, Ryan?
I will certainly speak on behalf of our district. Our intent, and certainly I think some of our board members heard the conversation early on from staff members about their desire to not have a movement given to them after they sign their contracts. And I said that we would like to be able to have this all in place. And certainly that would be, required upon voting and some things that we need to do at the board level, but that we would know what our staffing was before we issued the contract. So the staff could make that decision, Ms. Moran, on whether or not they wanted to stay with us and perhaps at a different location, but they would know that before they sign their contract.
And it seems to me that I hope that our staff would give us the benefit of the doubt to say that a change in location does not mean we don't value them, but that we are, excuse me, making these changes for the good of the entire district. And so I hope they can keep that in mind.
I would also, we are trying to be as mindful of that as possible. And so you'll recall at our last board meeting, we were moving at least one board meeting around, and you had asked me if that timeline was okay. And so Mr. Cooley and I do plan to bring you our recommendation for the staffing model on January 30th for next year. If we can move quickly with some feedback and feelings around that staffing model, that will certainly help us honor our existing staff with being able to implement that staffing model change with our principals and let our employees know what that looks like prior to contracts being released. I know that's quite a bit different from what the board has experienced in prior years, where we're really deep into budget work as far out as April. And I'm not saying we won't be doing that, but there's to help honor this problem, we will be bringing a fully baked staffing model change recommendation January 30th. I hope that makes sense. Oh, and we are meeting with principals on January 9th to give them that presentation to honor them as well, so they're not learning about those recommendations on January 30th. But I just wanted to highlight some of the expedited timelines that we are trying to put in place to be able to honor our staff as much as we possibly can, both in this trying time of boundary changes, but also in the trying times of COVID-19 funding, ESSER funding expiring. So.
All right, the traditional academy and honors, it does put a wrench in a few things. Students participating in our traditional academy and honors will have first priority at the schools according to their boundaries and as space permits. We have done this in the past when we did our boundaries changes, and if a student was in one of those and there was not room at their new boundaried school, we were able to provide them other options. It was considered open enrollment, so transportation wasn't always provided. That part isn't the wrench. The wrench is actually at school 17 with those new students. So we looked at the current boundaries, exactly what we have right now, the students who are at other schools in TA and honors. And we only have 7 students in second grade, 8 in third, 9 in fourth, and 16 in fifth. That complicates things on whether or not we have a traditional academy at the school 17 or L. Thomas Heck. If that is something we want to do, we could look at combo classes, doing a second and third grade and a fourth and fifth grade, and then continuing to have the honors at 7th and 8th would be fairly easy to do there. So that is just one of the things that we would need to work through, but that came up and it was, those numbers are rather low. We can't have an entire class like that. That would not be fiscally responsible. So other than that, the other moves we would honor as we have in the past as a first priority.
Would honors be offered at Palm Valley for the 6th graders that are going to be new there? So, I mean, I know they have a TA, but it only goes to 5th. So 6th grade, would they roll over into honors and then that program would just continue as we added grades?
So looking at the 6th grade numbers, I believe it's 71 that we would be looking at opening. That's just enrolled, not open enrollment.
Mhm.
And so it would be very easy to make one class in honors cohort. Mhm.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Oh,
I just want to backtrack real quick too, as far as letting you know that the goal is that to have a very comprehensive internal communications plan for this teacher once the decisions are made and the plan is put into effect, to make sure that our staff is fully aware of. So as we come into those contract things, that they are fully aware and they're making their decisions off of facts and not speculation. So that is one of the goals that we have as far as from the communication aspect.
We got you included in the last slide for sure there, Mr. Nuanez. Yeah, of course, the recommended timeline, January, we could seek board action for the recommended boundary changes. We would then create our meetings with our principals and our facilities folks to work on the changes needed. That would then get us into vendor quotes, new playgrounds, things like that, to get work going. Of course, build out that communication plan to notify our communities, get the information posted. I've struggled a little bit with our boundary map on the website, and so I've dug in with a vendor on how we would implement an interactive map that would be much more user friendly than trying to zoom in on what we got right now and it just being a big blur. And so that would come with it, just allowing our families to really be able to start there and see what it would look like. And then it rolls into that February, March timeframe as we talk about with staffing changes and then building to the new bus routes to be ready for the first day of school. So we stand for any more questions and conversation of where you're at and what more you want to know about as we continue to deliberate.
I have 2 questions. The first one is, you kind of touched on it. If we have students that could stay at Thomas Heck for 7th and 8th, but want to move early because they have siblings going into 6th grade or something like that, is that like an open enrollment thing? Are we prepared to let them do that?
If we chose the phased approach, their homeschool would be LTH, but
Right.
we would have the capacity of open enrollment to take them to that middle school.
Well, so, okay, since we're doing this phased approach, that means that anybody moves into our community that has a seventh or eighth grader, their kid would go to Thomas Heck. Because that's their homeschool, even though we're trying to transition.
If that's the way we word it, yes.
Okay.
And
but-
we'll have to choose one way or the other for sure.
Right, okay. And then Thomas Heck had a huge donation of money a year and a half ago now. And so I would like to know like if that has been spent on the kids there, or what does that mean if we make these changes for Thomas Heck?
But there has been some expenditures there on those kids. I think one of you is going to grab the mic. It's not fully expended though.
Yeah, so that donation is actually with our foundation. And so while we have some transparency to the exact amount of money there, we don't have full transparency in all instances. My recollection is there's about $20,000 still unexpended from that donation. But because it's not on our books and it's on the foundation's books, I can't just pull up the accounting system and check
Totally
that.
understand, but I would love, Kim, you're the person, if we could get some information about that when we, just
Yeah,
to know.
I believe the amount that's unaccounted for, they have been given direction that the entire amount was to be expended by the end of this school year. And the gift was restricted to be used on the L. Thomas Heck campus for campus improvements. So even if that school is not operating as a middle school, I believe that would still apply under the restrictions of the gift.
Okay.
President Zionam, I just also want to be clear, our desire is to not change the namesake of the building or school. So if Dr. Heck is out there listening, it might just be transformed, but certainly we will honor him and the work he's done in our district.
I assume that part. So yeah, I just wanted to make sure about the donation because I know that it was a very large amount of money and I know it was through the foundation, but I still want to make sure that we're getting that money spent on that campus and we're honoring why that donation was made. So
Yes, the foundation understands the restrictions on that gift and are making sure that the donor's wishes are being followed. As the liaison to the foundation is why I'm saying that.
I will just say, kind of to wrap everything up. Thank you guys. This is great. I don't see my role as, digging through all of these numbers and changing lines and asking about this. I may ask about a couple of things because it doesn't make sense to me, but I know the hours of work that you've put into it is, would never compare to me trying to read all the spreadsheets and all of that kind of stuff. So I don't feel like my role is to second guess, any of this individual work. I think it looks like you have put a lot of time and energy and you've thought about the kids all along the way and what's going to happen to them or where they're going to go or where they're going to end up. So I appreciate that. I will say just as feedback, which is what you're asking for here, the three things that I think are the most impactful and I have the most concerns about, excuse me, overall. Number one is open enrollments. I understand this is unpopular all around because we have financial obligations that we, have based on kids that are coming to our schools. Also, we want to offer an amazing Litchfield education to any student that wants to come to our district. So I applaud that and I want to make sure that's available. However, I do want us to look at whether it's our board policy. I know there's some conditions from, ARS and state law in terms of how we can categorize that. When I look at Verado Heritage at 123%, because 20% of them are open enrollment, that's concerning. Like I don't know if it's because they won't go anywhere else, or if we offered them another campus, they might go to Verado Middle School, or they might go to Scott Libby, or some other place that's close, or even somewhere else. I just think that because they're making do doesn't mean that's the right thing. And there are a lot of things, there are teachers on carts. There are consequences to those actions. And I just want to make sure, and I'm not picking on Verado Heritage. There are other schools here. That's just the one I remember because that's such a large number. There are others that go over 100% because of that. So I'm just laying it out there. That's a concern. I know we're never going to have the right answer, but I just appreciate the looking at our policy and state guidelines and what we can do to minimize the consequences to those campuses that are already really large. And I understand staffing is a big part of that, but to be totally honest, I'm not sure that I'm on board accepting hundreds of students just so we can get 3 or 4 staff kids into the school. That seems disproportionate to me. So I'm not saying that's what's happening, but I just know based on the priority list, that could very well happen. So anyway, I just want to put that out there. Second is the facilities. I know, with good reason, right? We have folks at Palm Valley that are concerned about, from a facilities perspective, is my child going to have the same experience as every other K-8 or middle school or whatever? Also, I'm sure the staff are wondering what the school is going to look like and how their job and sort of physical space is going to change. So it would be a priority of mine to make sure that the changes that need to be made are made in a timely fashion. And where that money comes from, I don't know, but Michael and his magic wand over here are just going to make that happen. But really doing what needs to be done and I understand the phased approach actually helps with that, which is great, but I don't want to hold back and not do the right thing by these kids when they're already being moved around or already having a different experience. So I want to make sure those facilities are up to par. And then the last is staffing. Again, I hear no lost jobs. I hear all of that. That's exactly my biggest concern. So I'm confident that you guys have that completely covered. And I am also in agreement that as much as I would love to keep staff at the campus they absolutely want to be at, if we need to move them, it is for a good reason. It's because that's where the students are. And that's where we need them to be is teaching the kiddos, where we need to put them. So those are my 3 pieces of feedback moving forward.
Thank you.
I just want to add to that, and I didn't think about this until tonight, but when Executive Director Stone talked about L. Thomas Heck is we've been talking a lot about Palm Valley converting to an eventual K-8 school, but we haven't talked as much about L. Thomas Heck going to have kinder kids next year. So that to me is a way bigger change. More students are impacted by that and everything. And so now I'm way more interested in how we're going to convert that campus to accommodate all of those students, because I feel like there are certain things that are required for 6, 7, and 8, but the fact that we have more time to do that makes me think we're going to meet those needs eventually, if not day 1 of school next year, throughout the year, as we do sometimes when we do portables and all that. But LTH seems to be of higher timeline priority now, in my mind. But I really appreciate the phased approach. That was, I think, makes everything easier to swallow, easier to not feel overwhelmed by all the changes, not only for all of you and all of the staff, not only at the district level, but at the school level, but then also for the parents to know that, for example, if I've got a 5th grader at Dreaming Summit, that child's going to have stability going into 6th grade and going forward and not be moved multiple times. So I really appreciate the impact, that you said, the impactful but not disruptive. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I don't want to say that I hated the previous scenarios, but this one's way better.
Duly noted.
So, yeah, no, honestly, I don't envy your job for the last several months, weeks, all that. I'm sure you're having, dreams about 7A and 68B but I do appreciate it. I know there's a lot that goes into it. With the teachers and the idea of having to switch schools, I understand the whole idea of, this is where I signed up for, this is where I applied, but, a lot of people are being impacted by these boundary changes, students, parents having to drive their students maybe not going to school with their older sibling, or maybe they wanted to always go to this school and now they're not going to go to it. So I appreciate everybody who might find themselves in that position, understanding that this isn't being done just because we want to do it, knowing you just individually. I know you're not trying to do this in anybody personally. So I'm excited about this and hopefully we can get it going.
Do you guys have anything else for us?
We do not, no, ma'am.
Well, thank you for all this information. I think I am glad that we did this. I'm glad that we gave a night just to talk about this. I appreciate you guys taking all that feedback and being able to come up with something that clearly has gotten less people upset by the lack of people that are here to get mad at us tonight. So, I'm looking forward to seeing this all come together as we move forward. I think we're done though, guys.
I would just like to thank our committee again. I've said it before, but to watch them transform from what this kind of was like, oh my gosh, you really want me to look at this many grid codes and I don't, what's a grid code, right? To the amount of feedback that was really impactful that last night with them was pretty awesome. And so thank you to them for taking the time out of their nights to meet however many times we did and really stretch their brain and develop a growth mindset about not just their community, but Litchfield as a whole district. So thank you to them.
And I want to give the two of you some kudos also because I read through all those exit tickets and they really had a lot of good things to say about how you conducted the committee and how all different voices were heard and actually felt respected during that process. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I don't know that I want to do this again anytime soon. However, we learned a lot and Eric has
Our
been a great
consulting business
partner.
Starts next week.
Yes.
So
You're the two best friends that anybody's ever had.
if Alwa Freya needs a consulting business to do their boundaries,
I'll be looking
I'll send you the
forward
bill in the mail.
to your conflict of interest form.
it's already in your box.
Noted, noted.
All right, well, Ryan,
I move to adjourn the meeting.
I will second.
Having a first and a second, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? No? Awesome. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everybody.